What if I told you that mediocrity isn't an accident, but a carefully designed project? An invisible architecture shaping your desires, your fears, even the way you think about yourself. You might believe you're choosing freely, that every step of your life comes from your own will. But look closer, and you'll realize that almost everything was programmed long before you were even born. From an early age, we're guided to fit into narrow molds, not to stand out too much, not to dream too high. Modern society has built a machine that runs on obedient, distracted, endlessly busy people. Yet, at the same time, perpetually empty. And the great irony is that amidst the promise of freedom and infinite possibilities, we are increasingly conditioned to live inside a narrow corridor of mediocrity. Consume what everyone else consumes, think what everyone else thinks, repeat what everyone else repeats. Even your rebellion has already been predicted, and turned into a product. The question is, who benefits from this? Who profits from your half-lived life? If you pay attention to everyday life, you'll see that mediocrity doesn't present itself as a failure, but as the standard. It's in the time spent mindlessly scrolling through your phone, hypnotized by images that leave no trace in your memory. It's in the jobs that demand more and more energy, yet give back less and less meaning. It's in shallow relationships, in conversations that circle around nothing, in the nearly suffocating fear of saying what we truly think. Modern society doesn't just allow this mediocrity, it demands it. Because someone who's too busy, too distracted, too numbed, has no time to ask the question that threatens the system most: what is all this for? And perhaps that's why you're here now, listening to these words. Because somewhere inside you, you've already sensed that something is wrong. That life cannot be reduced to chasing status, recognition, and cheap distractions. That there is something deeper, quietly demanding to be heard. But recognizing it is only the first step. The hardest part is facing the truth that mediocrity is not just an external condition. It has seeped inside us as well. We've grown accustomed to wanting little, questioning little, living in a survival mode that slowly kills the soul. And here is the promise I make to you. If you stay with me until the end of this reflection, we will uncover this invisible design together. You will see how modern society was built to domesticate you, to convince you that being less is enough. And more importantly, you will begin to understand how it's possible to break free from this conditioning, not to become extraordinary in the eyes of others, but to reclaim what mediocrity has tried to suffocate: your authenticity. Throughout this video, we will explore 5 dimensions of this process. How superficiality has become a virtue. How education shapes obedience. How work is used to drain meaning from life. How technology hijacks your attention. And how the fear of being authentic imprisons your existence. Each of these forces acts like an invisible chain, keeping you trapped in conformity and modest ambitions. But the real question is, what happens when you dare to look beyond the chains? The answer may frighten you. It may set you free. Either way, one thing is certain: nothing will look the same afterward. Because if mediocrity is a project, awareness may be your first act of rebellion. We live in an era where depth has become almost a flaw. Thinking too much, feeling too much, questioning too much. All of this is seen as a burden. Modern society, with its rush and its shiny reflections, has trained us to believe that the surface is enough. Zygmunt Bauman called this phenomenon liquid modernity. In it, nothing remains solid, neither bonds nor ideas nor identities. Everything must be light, disposable, flexible. And in the name of this lightness, we abandon the depth that once made us truly human. Just look at social media. Their appearance matters more than essence. A well-rehearsed smile, a carefully chosen filter, and suddenly, you become consumable. It doesn't matter what you truly feel, what you think in the silence of your mind, or the contradictions that haunt you at night. What matters is what can be displayed in seconds between one scroll and the next. Superficiality has been normalized to the point of feeling natural. No one asks anymore if it's healthy to measure your entire life against the carefully curated showcase of someone else's. No one questions whether it makes sense to reduce existence to metrics: likes, followers, engagement. The game of appearances has become so obvious that we forget to notice the absurdity it carries. But what's more frightening than living superficially is that we've learned to enjoy it. We've learned to confuse stimulus with meaning, image with identity, quantity with quality. We are surrounded by information, yet increasingly devoid of wisdom. The philosopher Kierkegaard said, "Most people live on the surface of life as if afraid of depth." And perhaps he was right, because diving deep requires courage. It demands confronting the discomfort of facing your own truth, acknowledging pain, doubt, fragility. Meanwhile, the surface offers constant anesthesia, quick entertainment, ready-made opinions, instant pleasures. Superficiality has become social currency. Those who are too light to commit, too quick to dive deep, and too distracted to think. These are the ideal citizens of the modern world. Because they don't get in the way, they don't disrupt, they don't question. They simply consume, and keep consuming. Think about an ordinary conversation. How often does it circle around nothing? Comments about the weather, the latest viral trend, what's hot right now. Rarely is there talk of death, purpose, loneliness, anguish, the very themes that define the human condition. And when someone dares to bring them up, they're quickly labeled too heavy, too intense, too negative. It's curious, we talk non-stop yet almost never say anything. We express ourselves constantly, yet rarely reveal who we truly are. And perhaps that's exactly what the system wants. Because shallow people pose no threat. They don't have the time, or the courage, to ask whether life could be different. The French philosopher Guy Debord, in The Society of the Spectacle, warned us decades ago. We live in a world where representation has replaced reality. You don't need to be happy, just appear happy. You don't need to know, just repeat. You don't need to live, just show that you're living. And so, little by little, superficiality stops being an individual choice and becomes a cultural norm. Those who seek depth are seen as misfits. Those who settle for the surface are rewarded with acceptance, belonging, even status. The danger is that we become complicit in the process. We laugh at the same jokes, follow the same trends, feign interests we don't actually have. Not because we truly want to, but because it's easier to conform than to face the loneliness of being authentic. But here lies the paradox. The shallower you become, the more adapted to the system you appear. And at the same time, the farther you drift from your own truth. This is the first invisible chain of mediocrity, the cult of superficiality. It convinces us that feeling little, thinking little, questioning little, is the safest way to live. And in a sense, it is safer, but also emptier. The question remains. If superficiality is the norm, what happens to those who still thirst for depth? Is there still room in this liquid world to dive without drowning? Nietzsche said that modern education doesn't cultivate free spirits, but obedient workers. And perhaps this is one of the most uncomfortable truths about the world we live in. From an early age, we are shaped not to think, but to conform. School, which should be a space to liberate the mind, has become a factory of repetition. Instead of awakening natural curiosity, it numbs it. Instead of teaching us to ask why, it teaches us to memorize ready-made answers. Instead of cultivating imagination, it rewards obedience. Think back to your earliest school experiences. How often were you encouraged to think differently? How often was a bold question welcomed as a sign of intelligence, rather than an annoyance? How often were you allowed to fail without punishment, simply to discover your own path? In most cases, school doesn't celebrate doubt, it represses it. Because doubt slows things down, complicates questions. And the system needs efficiency, predictability, standardization. This is why modern education feels more like training than learning. The philosopher Ivan Illich, in Deschooling Society, criticized this model. For him, institutionalized education teaches more about hierarchy, competition, and submission than it does about the world or life itself. We learn that there is always an authority who knows more than we do. We learn that our worth can be measured in grades, rankings, and diplomas. We learn that success means fitting the mold, not breaking it. And so, from childhood, we begin to be conditioned toward mediocrity. Not a mediocrity of intelligence, because the human mind is vast and capable, but a mediocrity of courage, because thinking freely requires courage. And courage is not taught in textbooks. The educational system creates the illusion of learning. You spend years memorizing formulas, concepts, dates. But what remains when the books close and the exams end? Most of the time, almost nothing. What remains is the habit of waiting for instructions, of seeking the right answer outside yourself, of avoiding risk. And this habit extends into adult life. We work as if we are always taking a test, waiting for approval. We live as if an invisible grade is evaluating every decision. We fear making mistakes, fear falling short, fear stepping out of line. This is where the invisible power of this conditioning becomes clear. Education does more than transmit knowledge. It shapes subjectivity. It teaches us to think within acceptable limits. It prepares us not for life but for the market. And yet, the market doesn't need free people. It needs useful people. Not creators but executors. Not thinkers but specialists confined to increasingly narrow domains, unable to see the whole picture. The writer Aldous Huxley in Brave New World foresaw this future. A society in which artificial happiness is guaranteed through conformity. Education in this context is not liberating, it is domesticating. And perhaps this is exactly the world we live in today. But if education trains us, where does the promise of human greatness remain? Where is the creative spark, the desire to explore, the ability to imagine different worlds? The answer is harsh. Often it is stifled before it even blooms. How many children have been called too dreamy? How many young people have been reprimanded for not focusing when they dared to think outside the box? How many talents have been crushed under the weight of standardization? And yet, the most dangerous thing isn't what is taken from us. It's what we are taught to desire. To desire approval. To desire recognition. To desire fitting into expectations even if it costs our own authenticity. This is the second invisible chain of mediocrity. Mental conditioning. An education that convinces us that being good means being obedient. That trains us to measure our lives through the eyes of others. That teaches us to doubt our own inner voice. The result? A society full of capable people yet insecure. Intelligent yet afraid to take risks. With immense potential, yet accustomed to living small lives. And here comes the inevitable question. Is it still possible to unlearn this conditioning? Can we relearn to think freely, to doubt with courage, to fail without shame? Perhaps this is the greatest challenge of maturity. To reclaim the freedom that childhood lost. To reconstruct a mind that was trained to be mediocre. And finally dare to seek a learning that isn't found in exams or diplomas, but in a life lived with depth. We live in an age where a person's value seems directly tied to their productivity. Not to who they are but to what they do. Not to their essence but to their usefulness. Ask someone, who are you? The answer will almost always be, I'm an engineer. I'm a teacher. I'm a designer. We define ourselves not by being but by function. Our identity has been hijacked by work. Nietzsche warned, man is the animal not yet fixed. But modern society has made sure to fix him. In jobs, resumes, spreadsheets. We've transformed life into a vast office, where even dreams must be productive. Viktor Frankl, a concentration camp survivor and the creator of logotherapy, said that humans can endure almost any suffering, except the feeling of living without purpose. And the system understood this. It realized it could offer a cheap substitute for purpose, productivity, a false sense of meaning measured in hours worked, goals achieved, upward trending charts. But here lies the paradox. The more we produce, the less alive we feel. We work harder than ever, yet the sense of emptiness only grows. It's as if we're running on an endless treadmill, unaware that we haven't moved an inch. This obsession with productivity creates a new form of slavery. No longer visible chains but tight schedules, endless meetings, suffocating deadlines. No longer slave masters but bosses, companies, and metrics. And the whip is now invisible, the guilt we feel when we're not being useful. How many times have you felt anxious just for resting? How many times have you thought you weren't doing enough? This is proof that the system's logic has infiltrated you. You no longer need an external supervisor, you have become your own watchdog. They call it hustle culture, the culture of constant motion. We celebrate those who work to exhaustion, who sacrifice sleep, health, and personal relationships in the name of a career. But how often do we pause to ask, a career for what? Productivity for what? The sociologist Max Weber, in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, showed how the idea of work as a spiritual virtue was transformed into an economic foundation. What was once religious discipline became a market engine. Today we no longer work to live. We live to work. And yet, work no longer offers dignity. In the industrial era, at least there was pride in building something tangible. Today, much of work is bureaucracy, data manipulation, tasks so abstract they leave no trace. How many people spend years dedicated to roles they can't even explain themselves? This emptiness shows up in our mental health. Never have so many people been exhausted, depressed, anxious. Never have we been so productive, and at the same time so unhappy. Because work, in its current form, doesn't fulfill the human need for meaning. It merely occupies time, slowly draining vitality. Frankl said that meaning cannot be given from the outside. It can only be discovered within us, in something that transcends mere utility. But modern society doesn't want you to discover this meaning, because once you do, you become ungovernable. You will no longer accept working just to enrich others, just to keep the gears turning. This is the third invisible chain of mediocrity, the cult of empty work. A cult that turns men and women into tools, reducing life to reports, spreadsheets, and targets. A cult that confuses motion with progress, effort with value, occupation with fulfillment. And the cruelest part is that we've been taught to take pride in this prison. Exhaustion becomes status. A packed schedule becomes a symbol of importance. Being constantly out of time becomes proof of relevance. But deep down, all of this may just be a sign of slavery. The question we must face is, what happens when work offers neither purpose nor dignity? When it becomes merely a sophisticated form of survival? When a job consumes so much of us that there's nothing left to live outside of it? Perhaps the answer is painful. Perhaps it reveals that we are trading life for an illusion of security. Perhaps it shows that our greatest productivity is, in fact, our greatest mediocrity, spending decades building something that, in the end, doesn't belong to us. But if this is true, what does it mean for our lives today? What remains when we realize that working hard isn't the same as living well? Is it possible to rebuild a relationship with work that isn't about slavery, but about creation, contribution, expression? This is the question that leads us to the next chapter. Because perhaps the true prison isn't just the work we do, but the attention stolen from us every single day. We live in an era where attention has become the planet's most valuable resource. More than oil, more than gold, even more than time, because time only matters when it's inhabited by attention. And if your attention can be bought, then so can your life. Gabor Mate, in his study of human addiction, showed that every addiction is, at its core, an attempt to escape pain. What he perhaps didn't anticipate is that the system would manage to turn distraction itself into a collective addiction. We no longer need chemicals to numb the mind. Just swipe your finger across a screen. Big corporations have discovered how to hijack the most intimate part of us. Our ability to choose where to look, what to think, what to feel. The digital economy isn't free. The product was never the app, the feed, or the platform. The product is you. Your attention, fragmented, diverted, exploited every second. And the most striking part is how we've learned to take pride in this invisible slavery. We laugh at our own inability to stay away from our phones. We joke about binge watching, being glued to the screen, as if it were harmless entertainment, rather than a carefully engineered mechanism of control. How many hours have you lost in a single day of infinite scrolling? How many books left unread? How many deep conversations skipped? How many silences left unexplored? Simply because your attention was drained by passing images. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han, in The Swarm, describes what he calls the society of transparency. We live exposed, connected, constantly active. But this overexposure doesn't bring us closer to ourselves. It fragments us. We are bombarded by stimuli every second, unable to focus on a single thing. Mediocrity here doesn't present as a lack of intelligence. It presents as an inability to concentrate, to stay with something long enough to truly understand it, to endure the necessary boredom for creation, for thought, for self-knowledge. And the system thanks us for it. Because a fragmented mind is a manipulable mind. Those who cannot focus cannot resist. Those who cannot dive deep cannot question. Those who cannot sustain silence will never find their own voice. This is the fourth invisible chain of mediocrity, the slavery of attention. We don't need guards or bars, we carry the prison in our pockets. And the key, ironically, is also in our hands, yet we almost never manage to use it. The attention economy has turned us into compulsive consumers of stimuli. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more stimuli we consume, the less capable we become of feeling pleasure. Dopamine wears down, the mind adapts, and we need ever larger doses to feel ever less. It's the logic of addiction. And like any addiction, it exists to keep us trapped. How many of us haven't felt that strange anxiety of being alone without a screen nearby? The discomfort of simply existing in silence? This inability to stay with oneself is the deepest mark of modern conditioning. Because someone who cannot tolerate their own company will always seek something outside themselves to fill the void. And the market has an endless supply to sell. The remaining question is, what happens to an entire society unable to sustain its own attention? What happens when all dialogues become fragments, when all thoughts become tweets, when life itself is reduced to notifications? What happens is that we become superficial without realizing it. And we return to the vicious cycle. Superficiality breeds distraction, distraction fuels superficiality. Meanwhile, what could flourish within us, creativity, reflection, authenticity, is slowly suffocated. The slavery of attention is cruel because it is silent. It doesn't hurt immediately. It doesn't threaten with violence. It seduces, entertains, distracts, and before you know it, you've been trapped for years. But if attention is the most valuable resource of your life, perhaps true rebellion is learning to protect it. To turn your gaze inward again even if it hurts. To endure boredom even when it seems unbearable. To withstand silence even when it reveals uncomfortable truths. Because only a mind that belongs to itself can live with depth. And only those who reclaim their attention can truly escape mediocrity. Yet there is still one last chain, perhaps the deepest of all. The fear of being who we truly are. And that is where we turn now. Among all the invisible chains that bind us to mediocrity, perhaps none is as powerful as this one. The fear of being our authentic selves. Have you noticed how modern society loves to talk about authenticity? It's a word that has become a brand slogan, an influencer's catchphrase, even a corporate mantra. Companies that profit precisely from standardization. But if everyone tells us to be authentic, why are so few of us able to truly be it? The truth is harsh. Authenticity is a threat to the system. An authentic individual is unpredictable. They don't fit easily into consumer categories. They don't follow trends, slogans, fashions with docility. They make others uncomfortable because they think for themselves, feel for themselves, decide for themselves. And the modern world was not made for free individuals. It was made for predictable consumers. From an early age, we learn that being different comes with a price. In school, the child who dares to think or act outside the line is ridiculed. In adolescence, the young person who doesn't conform to the group is excluded. In adulthood, anyone who refuses to follow society's standards of success, career, status, image, is seen as a failure. This is how fear settles in. Fear of rejection. Fear of ridicule. Fear of being invisible. Carl Jung said that the greatest challenge for a human being is to individuate, to become who we truly are. But he also knew that this process is painful. Because individuation requires breaking away from the mask, the persona, the image we create to be accepted. And shedding that mask is like tearing off your own skin. That's why so many prefer to remain in the comfortable mediocrity of conformity. We live in a cruel paradox. We long to be ourselves, yet we fear the weight of authenticity. We want freedom, but we tremble at the solitude it may bring. We want to be seen, but we fear that showing our true selves will lead to rejection. The result is a lukewarm life, a diluted identity. We smile when we want to cry. We applaud when we disagree. We feign conviction when we feel lost. And little by little, we become characters in our own lives. Nietzsche warned, "Become who you are." A simple phrase, yet devastating. Because becoming who you are demands courage. Courage to face the gaze of others. Courage to endure the discomfort of being different. Courage to lose certainty and embrace the vulnerability of your own truth. But when that courage is absent, all that remains is the mask. And to live behind a mask is to live on the surface. It's to abandon depth, to settle for existential mediocrity. The fear of authenticity is so effective at keeping us trapped because it operates from within. We don't need explicit censorship nor authoritarian mandates. The control is already internalized. We are the ones who silence ourselves, who shape ourselves, who shrink ourselves to fit the space allotted to us. And so modern society manufactures mediocrity on a massive scale. Through the fear of judgment. Through the fear of exclusion. Through the fear of loneliness. Universal fears transformed into tools of control. But what happens when someone dares to cross that barrier? When someone decides to pay the price of authenticity? Yes, they may lose applause, lose followers, lose status. But they gain something no system can sell: integrity. The right to inhabit themselves. The possibility of living with depth. Authenticity is not comfortable. It is not easy, it is not always rewarded. But it is the only way out of the maze of mediocrity. Because without authenticity we will never be truly free. And perhaps that is the final point of this reflection. Modern society conditions us to be mediocre because it fears the transformative power of authentic individuals. Mediocrity is predictability. Authenticity is revolution. The path to escaping these chains is not external. It is not about destroying the system, reforming institutions, or waiting for the world to change. The path is internal. It is reclaiming attention, recovering depth, restoring the courage to be who you truly are. Only then does mediocrity lose its hold over us. And the question remains: will you have the courage to become who you truly are, even if it costs everything they told you you should be? If you find yourself questioning the world like I do, join me. This channel is for those who refuse easy answers. Subscribe to continue exploring with me the contradictions that make us human.